Lamar Jackson. Let's talk about Lamar for a second here. I mean, we talked about him a lot. This is a quarterback that you can make the argument is worth the top end deal. When you look at his gravity, how well he does. We're talking about running backs on Monday, but like if you look at yards before contact for running backs, all the guys that play for Lamar have an easier time running the ball. The drawbacks, of course, are he's more effective when you're ahead because he's not as effective of a passer as some of these truly elite quarterbacks. And there's also the injury part. Like a lot of people say, when you run the football, you get injured. He has not, finished the season the last 2 years. So there's a lot of like risk there. When we think about and we also, he doesn't have an agent, right? And this, you could talk about like what it's like to negotiate. He doesn't have an agent, right? He doesn't have an agent.
No, exactly.
So like when you think about negotiating with a player who might not be able to see the daylight in a contract that benefits him and the team, that makes it really tough.
God, it's tough. No agent, look, I'm sure they're being very, very proper about how they're keeping their business inside as much as possible. But I continue, you continue to hear out there again, it may be media reports about what you're dealing with him. And you have to be clear that you want to go into battle with this guy for, like you said, another long stretch of a contract. Like you have to feel committed as a GM to look at your owner and say, 100% I'm behind this guy. And I still am not convinced. No offense, Eric, I'm not answering for you, DeCosta, but I'm just not convinced after a big contract for a linebacker. We've had that conversation. We don't need to get into it, of course, that this is who they're committed to. I mean, it's not easy for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, it doesn't help their case with Lamar, right? Because this is a team that walked on Ngakoue. They walked on Judon after 1 year on the tag. They walked on CJ Mosley. They've walked on a lot of players. And, Eric DeCosta, they say EDC, every dollar counts, right? That's in the Ravens Twitter lexicon, right? And so you can't get like, my issue is like, you could say, oh, Eric DeCosta is stingy, right? Which isn't true. They've paid Mark Andrews. They paid Ronnie Stanley. They paid, who's the corner, Marlon Humphrey. So like they pay their stars, but he has that reputation for being stingy. But then he goes and pays $20 million APY to a linebacker who's spent half the season with the team. If you're Lamar, you're saying, okay, no more, this is everything's on the table here because they blinked on Roquan Smith. And so I think that it makes it really hard. I would not be surprised if we saw Lamar Jackson moved this offseason. A lot of people are putting him in Falcons jerseys on Twitter. That would be kind of sick, I think. Chicago might be. Every Bears fan gets so like reflexive. We saw this at the Super Bowl, reflexively angry with you if you suggest trading Justin Fields. But like you think about the Bears, how much flexibility they have. Could they maybe move Fields to Baltimore, get Lamar, and in return possibly type thing? Ravens would have to get more from the Bears in return and stuff. But I think Lamar ends up outside of Baltimore after this offseason, but that's just, I don't have any inside information there. I'm just speculating.
I feel that. Just a little aside irony. You're talking about Eric, every dollar counts. I mean, I think Eric is a very smart football man for sure. And he comes through an organization. Here's the interesting thing. That organization for coaches and GMs and personnel, man, is one of the most coveted organizations and the highest paying organizations in the league. And honestly, more, coveted in comparison to other sports. Like everyone talks about the Ravens and ownership being 100% behind their people. So I just find that a little ironic because.
Yeah, this is actually a really good question by BeatGamer99, by the way. Please like the podcast on YouTube. It helps us get more followers. It helps us build this community of great people like BeatGamer99. How would a trade even work if you're trading for him? You would have a hard time negotiating without an agent. That is a good question, but we saw this the other way, right? Roquan Smith didn't really have an agent in Chicago. And it's sort of that thing where like, obviously the grass is greener type thing. He couldn't figure something out with the Bears, but he goes to Baltimore and it's like, it's the new shiny toy and they treat him well and all this kind of stuff. Lamar's going to have a better chance negotiating with a team that just acquired him because they don't have the warts. They don't have the for better or worse, they don't have the history together. And so I do think that if you trade Lamar, it's gonna be trivial to get him a contract on the second team, because trading for Lamar, much like it did with Roquan Smith, implies wanting him in a way that I don't feel like he feels wanted with the Ravens. The same way Roquan didn't feel wanted with Chicago. So I think that's the answer, but I do think that's a great question. What if we move on to?
I'm sorry, Eric, can I say, I believe that, just for everyone not to think that Lamar's just in there, he's going in to talk. I'm sure he's the one that's having the conversations, but there's no question that he has hired someone to do the minutia of his contract. It's not an agent negotiating. He's not just reading the contract himself. He might hire an attorney out there just to be the review guy. There are probably so many layers of how he's going to be dealing. There's no way he's going to be looking at that money and expecting, his cousin who's, works as an engineer somewhere to go through his contract.
Yeah.
So just so everyone knows that he's not just completely winging it.
Yeah. Yeah, but the agent having the history with the player is a real big deal, right? And the agent having kind of connections and other players who kind of, like, one of the things that, it goes unnoticed, right? If you haven't been in the game, and like you obviously have for a lot longer, but, in my time working at PFF with agents and knowing, the agent having a network of, like, if you screw over an agent with player A, you're also going to have to answer to that same agent with player B that you also want to sign. So there is a good faith that has to happen, and that networking, the Athletes First, CAA, like all those like big groups, Wasserman, like all those big groups, like they work together, and like there's a good faith, and the market becomes more efficient because because you have to deal with these human beings who have multiple clients. And I think it works in efficiency ways and maybe inefficiency ways, but I do think it does make the situation easier to work with when you have an agent.
Have you ever read a quote from Lamar per why he decided not to have representation?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
That's an interesting. Have you? Like,
No,
I haven't heard.
I asked that because, of course, as a general manager, I would be like in his face, like seriously, and I would be trying to cajole him into like understanding, like, what are we doing here? This is vital. We're going to be impeded through this whole negotiation for the most part. Now, I'm not talking about a guy who's the back end of the roster guy. This guy is huge in the NFL.
Well, to an anecdote to that point, my friend Brant Tillis, and I think this was in the article in SI, so I'm not giving away any inside information, but when they went to go negotiate with Mahomes, they said, look, you're going to be a Chief for as long as you play in the NFL. So that's a truth. And now let's work around that. I do think that that's something that has to, and I think the Ravens are so staunch and in their in their process, they don't want to give away they don't want to give away some of their cards there. And so maybe they didn't say that, but I do think that that's an important and instructive aspect of it, to say, look, we are not letting you go. And Mahomes is better than Lamar, but Lamar is a great player, an MVP. Like, you go to him and say, look, we're not letting an MVP walk. Okay. So you're getting a deal done with us. We have these instruments. We have, the 5th-year option. We have the franchise tag. We have another franchise tag. So we have you for the next 3 years, whether you like it or not. And we're willing to pay those monies. But what we'd want to do is make you here 5 years. And let's get, or in the case of Mahomes, it was 10, right? And we talked about that structure on the last Wednesday's podcast, where once you get that, once you set those parameters, the rest of the thing just kind of you're accounting at that point. And in the Chiefs case, very intelligently, but that to me, that part has been missed in the Lamar negotiation, which is just like, you're going to be a Raven, and let's hammer out the details now. But